All right, so in this part three of the session, we're going to be looking at the first. Let's look at the problem analysis and the project design. And why does it matter? Why does good project design matter? I think it's important for us to look at this because that is the core of all you'll be doing project design and problem analysis. Without a problem existing, you won't be having a project to implement. Does that make sense? Right. So a well-designed project tells a clear story. I mean, the story of what the problem is and why it matters, and how your solution is going to change things. That's the whole story about writing a proposal. There's a problem, it matters, and you have a solution that is going to change things. If you can understand it as simple as this, then you are on, right? So reviewers look at a logical flow from problem to solution. Does that make sense? So you have your problem defined, you have your objectives, you have your activities, you have your results. That's the flow. The chain is from problem to objective, from objectives to activity, and from activity to result. And this activity must be able to solve the problem that you already identified. So a weak logic chain is the most common reason why many proposals fail. I mean, there's no connection between the problem you identified, the objectives you set, the activity you want to implement, and the results you want to achieve. They are not connected to each other. That's the major reason why many proposals fail. And once you're able to have a hold at this, your chances of success will increase. So now, let's talk about how to build that logic into your proposal. I think one of the most important things to do is to start with data, because data proves the existence of your problem. And it is also through data that you measure to what extent the problems are solved. Right? So, in this case, how do you use zero dose data? You already know what zero dose mean. I mean zero dose children. So the data you use must relate to zero dose data, right? Now, in the GAVI, the guidance for this call in Annex 1, GAVI has listed a number of zero dose children in each of the local governments. I don't know if you've taken your time to read it. They've listed through by their own analysis, I mean baseline study, they've been able to list the number of zero dose children in each of the local governments in each of the states that they are targeting. So use those figures to justify your focus area. You don't need to do a lot of work again to get those information. The information is already done, it's already generated through their own baseline analysis. So you have these figures, go back to the guidance, check for the particular local government where you want to do your work, and find out the number of zero dose children in those areas and use that as your base. Right? For example, Kano has over 427,000 zero dose children, and that's powerful evidence base for your proposal if you're working in Kano. Check for other local governments, other states and their local government, and find out the number of zero dose children already identified. So the work is done for you. It's just for you to use the figure to establish your case, right? So next, let's identify what are driving those numbers. Now you have the numbers, right? But you also need to prove that you understand what are driving those numbers, factors. to those problems, right? So a problem tree helps you to unpack this. I mean, the root causes of those and effects of those things. I don't know if you get that. You now have the number of zero dose children, but you also need to identify what is behind those numbers. What are the root causes why those children are unable to get immunized? There are factors to that, and you need to identify that, not just stating the number. So those are the root causes. Not also getting vaccination also has its own implications. So there's a root cause, there are numbers, there is the effect. You need to be able to build coherence along this line, right? So for example, problem can be low immunization uptake from the numbers already there, right? What are the causes? Causes can be poor access, it can be misinformation, it can be lack of data. It varies from place to place, but you need to also identify what are the root causes in the area where you work. Then what about the effects? Effects, that is to say, now that we have so and so number of zero dose children or under-immunized children, what is the implication? What other problem is it leading to? So that coherence needs to be there. Think of things like outbreaks, preventable diseases because of low immunization, outbreaks of diseases that could otherwise be prevented, particularly in children and under 5 aged children. So once you're able to understand this chain, then you can design a precise and realistic intervention. And it's not a difficult thing to do. So now let's try to turn the problem into solution. So what we've done so far now is to have a problem chain established. But problem alone does not complete your project. Identifying problem alone does not complete your project. You are requesting for this fund because you want to bring a solution. And that is where your project comes in. But it must be based on an existing problem that is well defined. Do you get that? So turning this problem into solutions, we need you to establish your objectives, the objectives of your project, right? Objective for which you are requesting those grants. What objectives are you setting? The objectives you are setting must relate to the problem you have already identified. They cannot disconnect from them. You've already identified set of problem, the root cause, the numbers, and the effects of those problems. They are well established. So at the point you are defining your objectives, they must connect back to the problem chain that you've established. If there's a disconnect between your objective and the problem you've established, you are beginning to lose it, and you may not be selected, right? So flip each problem into a positive goal. Those problems you've already identified, flip them into a positive goal, a goal that solves them, a goal or objectives that roll the problem back. So because what you're talking about is problem, your objective must be able to reduce that problem or improve opportunity to solve them. Something must change. The objective must be able to define a change that is going to happen as a result of your project. For example, improved access. When you say that something has improved, it means that there is a change. It moved from where it was before to where, or getting closer to where you want it to be. Something has improved. So those keywords are very important. To improve, to reduce, to strengthen, to promote. Those keywords are important to show that your objectives will create change, right? So you can talk about things like improving access through community outreach. You can talk about things like enhancing data quality through staff mentoring, right? So whatever objective you want to state there, the important thing is that they are linking back to the problem you already identified, and they show that change is going to happen. So link every objective directly to one of GAVI's 4 main results area. I'm giving you idea of how to succeed with this. So whatever objective you want to set, make sure that you link it to those 4 areas, those 4 priorities that GAVI has established. Don't disconnect it from them, and don't disconnect it again from the problem you've already established, right? Fine. So now, as you plan this, be sure that you include cross-cutting priorities. GAVI has established 4 key priorities which you must never disconnect from. But there are also other cross-cutting priorities. And those cross-cutting priorities, as identified in the guidelines by GAVI, include gender, integrating gender, and also localization. Those are examples of cross-cutting issues that have been identified, which you must also integrate while you are building your objective. So, how do you build gender and localization? For example, prioritizing in your target population, prioritizing women and girls. Girls in particular, because we are talking about children and immunization now, right? So that is how you integrate gender equality in your proposal. Include women and youth, include also community leaders in your strategies. So for example, one way you can do this is by employing female vaccinators, for example. Yes, that way you can also mainstream gender in your programming. So this using female vaccinators, for example, can increase acceptance in certain communities. And also, for example, working through existing CBOs will ensure that local ownership and sustainability is achieved. And that talks directly about localization, right? Localization simply means ownership of the solution by the local communities, right? So this is how you build these things in. And now that your objectives are getting clear, it's time for you to measure them. It's time to measure. You have to measure your objectives. Getting the objectives right is one thing. Keeping them measurable is another thing. So what we have looked at so far is that you need to properly define your problem, build a problem chain. GAVI has already identified the numbers of under-immunized children and zero-dose children in each of the locations. Your work here is to identify the factors behind those numbers and the effect of those numbers, and use them to establish your problem statement. Once you have done this, based on the problem statement you've established, and also the key priorities that GAVI has set, develop your objectives to show that those problems that are already identified needs to change. So create your objective to show that something needs to change, and also integrate gender and localization while building these objectives. So this is the summary of how to create your problem statement and build your objectives. So in the next part of this session, which is part 4, we are going to build on this logic that we've developed now and create a result framework. Not just result framework, but also your monitoring plan, which you can now use to develop your narratives in that you put in your project workbook. So join me in the next part, which is part 4, so that we progress.